Hello and welcome to yet another podcast with the Carbon Circle. Today with us we have Dr. Chengwei, who is joining us as a behavioral science expert. And today we have a very unique topic. The topic that we're going to cover is why smart people fail at sustainability. We'll look at the psychology of inaction and the civic responsibility, something that is less spoken about, but I feel, or rather we at Carbon Mandal feel it's extremely important that we talk about them. In the new course of the podcast, we are going to cover a range of topics. The first topic that we're going to cover is from randomness to responsibility, how behavioral science explains inaction. Uh, the second topic that we're going to cover today is why awareness doesn't equal action, the psychology of inaction again, uh, where we will indulge into concepts that has been framed by Dr. Shingwei, which will circle around just world hypothesis and much more. The third topic that we're going to cover today is from barriers to design, how behavioral science creates change. And finally, we'll wrap it up with looking at the Vikasit Bharat theme, that is behavioral design for Vikasit Bharat 2047, building sustainably designed society for India. And Dr. Shengwei is going to give us a fresh view on this topic of sustainability because he's an expert at behavioral science. So, Dr. Shengwei, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Great. So let me kick off with the first question for today. Uh, so let's start with your journey, Shengwei. You're trained as an economist in Taiwan. You have researched luck and randomness extensively, and now you're applying behavioral science to organizational culture and decision making. So what drew you into studying behavior in the first place? So you have made a transition from economics to studying behavior. What happened there?
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting question for me to reflect on. I was trained in Taiwan, as you mentioned, and I was a management consultant, specializing in marketing and pricing strategies. But there's a puzzling observation when I worked that sometimes we did this very nice analytical report recommending certain action to our clients. But certain clients just don't listen. They just kind of continue doing whatever they like to do. So we're very frustrated. But then we found actually they had a great success afterwards. And
Mhm.
sometimes the other way around, right? We advise something, the client really listen and bring everything on board and do that, execute very well. But still, that didn't work in terms of the outcome. So, of course, the general lesson learned from that is that we operate in environment with uncertainty, right? So, good
Right.
decision can lead to bad outcome, and bad decision can lead to good outcome because of, well, generally luck, well, something beyond your control, foresight, right? So that's kind of what motivated me to look at this decision-making aspect and also the role of randomness, luck, coincidence, serendipity, how that influence the outcome more generally. So that led me to my research project in Cambridge, where I did my PhD. And then in the past 15 years, I studied this topic. Yeah, as you said, I really enjoy it. There's still a lot of other things I don't understand. I really want to explore. There's a brilliant role of randomness playing in life or in society also.
Very, very deep. But do you miss the economics that you left behind?
Well, my part of my identity, you can say, is a behavioral economist. So when I was trained in Taiwan, that's kind of the best economics department, right? National Taiwan University. But I always feel there's something not, I don't feel comfortable. I was not really motivated because some of the classic theories in economics, they are based on pretty unrealistic behavior assumptions. Like everyone has the perfect information and the utility can be presented using a mathematical function. Of course, that's very convenient if you want to build a model and solve all this equilibrium, right? What happens in the long run, not individually, but also collectively in the long run. And you can make all this macro level prediction, right? That's very useful.
Mhm.
But those predictions may not be that relevant if the assumptions are false, right? So if that's not what how people behave. So the revolution of this behavioral economics started almost 40, 50 years ago. That's kind of revising, relaxing some of this assumption and see what can we predict human behaviors better, and also normatively can we encourage better decision making or more better behavior or behavior leading to better consequence and better outcomes. So I would say behavior economics, in my view, is a more promising subject compared to conventional economics. But I
Right.
think some of the tension is that if you think about policymaker, who they listen to, and usually conventional economists still have that high status compared to other discipline in social science, like not just behavior economics, but like psychology, sociology, anthropology. Yeah, I think that is a little bit unfortunate mismatch in my view in many countries.
Right, right. I mean, it's fascinating to understand that because we as engineers we rely highly on data, and we do all this predictive analysis and predict the future how it's going to look like. But most often we overlook the part of the behavioral sciences, right? Because we don't account for the things that cannot or that are not under our controllables, right? So again, I mean, going back to the answer that you just provided me with, the factor of luck. Let me dig a little deeper in that direction there. So you research on luck is fascinating because it reveals that high performers often misattribute their success to skill when in fact luck has played a major role. So you have shown that we suffer from an illusion of control. We believe we are more in control of our outcomes than we actually are. Now, here's what I'm curious about, Shengwei. How does this illusion of control prevent people from taking systemic action on climate change? If people believe they are more in control than they are, wouldn't that theoretically make them more likely to act?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I didn't make that connection until you asked this question, right? When you share it, I really put some thought on that. Yes, I think illusion of control in general will lead to more action, right? And because you believe you can change things, right? But that depends. The outcome, whether it's good or bad, depends on whether the action or the decision-making process is sound,
Hmm.
uh, or is a match to the problem you're solving. So I think one of the reflection I have is illusion of control really make a lot of engagement in sustainability activity to be in the wrong way because we're not wired to understand our action to environment. So think about it. If you link to like how we make sense of the environment, how we decide, how our cognition works, these are all shaped by evolution like a
Right,
million years ago. And that type of environment, basically whatever human being did, our ancestors did, now they can exploit the environment, kill all the animal they saw. They're not going to impact the environment too much. The environment can always recover because of the technology limitation, right? But things have changed a lot in the past 200 or 300 years. The technology kind of grew like exponentially, and well, thanks to or due to some of these unfortunate wars, the advance of technology jumped even kind of even faster. And many of this technology from military transformed to civil use, in the fishing industry, and all this kind of becoming so effective, but exploited the system at a level that we are not ready to understand.
right.
So but our kind of cognition can still kind of in a stone age kind of type, right? We believe well, the illusion control, so whatever we do is not going to change the environment. But now with the technology at hand, we can. That mismatch is really unfortunate, and that illusion becomes a very unfortunate driver that a lot of skeptics out there, right? They believe technology innovation, just like in the past, will always solve all the challenges we as a species had. But probably not this time. This time, the technology we created exactly create this trap. We're not going to escape from this trap easily. So that's, yeah, I think it's a very good question to ask.
But that paints a very dark picture. Given that today we have the technologies that could potentially solve the problem that we today call as climate change, but still, while the solutions exist, not enough is being done. given that, I mean, as a practitioner of sustainability, providing consulting solutions, I get to talk to so many people across the board. Uh, Today, there are less naysayers when it comes to climate change. Everybody sort of understand the problems, the impacts of climate change. But while it comes to decision making, there is always a hesitation. I mean, do we do it now? Do we do it sometime later? So, according to you, what is that aspect of the human brain or the human decision making that impacts this critical aspects of making the decisions on the go, like taking quick actions?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's two perspectives, and you already hinted, right? So many people can recognize the challenge and sustainability. We need to do something about it. But on the other hand, there's we human beings all have this shortenism or myopia that we
Mm.
focus a lot on what happened in the near term, and we underestimate or discount the future consequence very strongly. And that's very unfortunate, particularly sustainability. The impact is, well, can have a huge impact in the long run, but in the short run, you may not feel it. And also, that impact is very different depending on where you are in the world, right? So the location, this can be said the lottery, the birth lottery, depending on where you're born and when you're born. And the consequence of all this ignoring the sustainability challenge can be very different. So on the first is that well, you asked the central question is that why smart people make terrible decisions.
Right.
Actually, it may not be terrible decision. They just optimize or rationalize the payoff they got. Because if you think about it, if you're executive in a company, so what if you believe all this temperature going to rise for 1 degree in the next 10 years? Of course, this is a belief many people share. But what if that is wrong? So what if that is
Mm.
imprecise because it's uncertain, right? This prediction, no one can guarantee that's going to be correct. Then you have two possible errors in the sense that if you believe this statement but turn out to be wrong, then you pay a lot of immediate costs, right? Because you adjust your business, you buy a lot of additional equipment, you pay the immediate cost, but it turns out to be wrong. So you lose all your competitive advantage against others who don't share that belief immediately. And the other mistake, of course, that you don't do anything, you don't believe this statement. But it turns out this is a correct prediction that in some years that the temperature will rise for by 1 degree, if not more, and the destruction of the entire species will happen. But that is long term. That will probably happen, I don't know, 10 years, 20
You wouldn't
years.
survive to see it.
Exactly, and you may maximize the current profitability, right? So if you're a smart person, from an economist point of view, usually it's like a rational, right? You
Right.
calculate all this payoff, the short term, the long term payoff. Well, the rational conclusion may be just ignore that. I mean, who knows? No one live long enough to suffer the consequence, right? It's a next generation thing. So if you have this myopia, well, it may be very rational to ignore that even you privately believe that prediction may not entirely be wrong. So that's very unfortunate. But the other, I think, a lot of research I saw on sustainability linking to behavioral science also highlight very often solving this type of grand challenge like sustainability is not just about individual decision making, it's about a collective. There's a coordination challenge. Like a sufficient number of people need to be on board with these policy changes and do the change at the same time. But coordinated this coordination it can be very difficult when you have this kind of echo chamber or polarized society. Well, in many countries we observe, right? If there's substantial resistance in the society, then it can make coordination almost impossible. Or whenever people or society manage to coordinate, it's usually too late for all these challenges, right? Because some of the issues are pretty urgent. We need to solve it by certain time frame. Otherwise, it's too late. So yeah, it's a very dark prediction. It's yeah, that's there's no easy solution, but I
Yeah.
think behavioral science and many sustainability researchers they recognize the challenge. But what is the solution is not yet clear, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I mean, I get what you're trying to convey here, because the solution is not an easy one. And given that today we are roughly 8 billion population, convincing everybody is highly unlikely. But there are certain key change makers that exist in every society. I mean, in democracy, it is more of a group, trying to lead to a decision and decision making there. And there are a lot of different stakeholders, different point of views that are impacting this very decision making. Uh, but today in the country, I mean, here when we're talking about India, uh, I mean, climate change. The problem of climate change is definitely being felt across states. I mean, it's not just one state. I mean, every state is facing one challenge or the other. It's either flooding or drought or one of the other impacts of climate change is being felt. But even having seen that, felt it, you are an observer, you are a person who has experienced the impact of climate change. The necessity to take action is still lacking. And I'll give a simple example. I mean, when we imagine of having a clean home inside, you brush it, you dust it, you mop the floor and everything. But when you step out into the street, there seems to be that lack of civic sense, right? I mean, generalizing is of course wrong, but the very person that you are inside your own home, when you step out into the roads, you do not you no more have that civic sense. So where is the problem? I mean, is it in our genes, or is it in the way that we are brought up in a given society? I mean, you did mention that you're born by the stroke of luck. I mean, you can't decide or choose which part of the geography you're going to be born in. But does that have significant influence on how you behave and how what kind of citizen you will probably become?
So yeah, that's a very good question. I think some of the work by economists become very relevant here. So they study about this the tragedy of the commons. So the public street example you gave exactly is like a common resource, right? So when it's a common resource or public goods, then it's a very strong incentive people to free ride, right? They wait for the others or the city council to clean the street because they don't own it, but they can use it, but they don't care about maintaining it at all. They just wait for others to do it. But once every individual think about the same, then that is the tragedy, right? The public street or the facility always kind of more dirty than people want to have. Um, so two very general solution. One is about the ownership, right? So tragedy of the common. So if you change that the common resource or public resource, you allocate very specific ownership to specific people. Usually can solve part of the problem because just like what you said, right? If you're your private land, you kind of maintain that very diligently.
Yeah.
So if the part of the street is actually belong to you, you probably will pay more attention to that. Yeah, but the other solution is probably interesting is the sense of community. So like if you're in a town, then the public road is no longer general public. It really belongs to your town and the identity that you belong to here. So actually, you almost like own it as a community. That actually solve a lot of this public goods problem effectively. Then it becomes a different solution type, right? You need to kind of have this kind of activity to build, to unite people in the same areas, to have a different activity. So they kind of build this identity, collective identity gradually and strengthen it over time. So I think that is part of the solution economists suggest. But the other aspect of your question is related to what we said about the consequence of climate change or sustainability issue are very different, right? It's related to almost like luck. It's just not within India, but also the divide between developed country and the developing countries, right? I
Yeah.
think some of the discussion are about that. And I think in the previous exchange, you mentioned this the belief in a just world. So I think that is actually a connection, very interesting because many people in the developed country, like here in the UK, for example, sometimes they feel sustainability issue is not really relevant to them, or they're not responsible for them because they attribute all this good life they have and the infrastructure they have to their effort and their design.
Yeah.
Uh, and those people who suffer from all this consequence, they just blame, well, they deserve it because they never really invested in this infrastructure. There's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of corruption. But they forget, I mean, that is the birth lottery we talk about, right? Because they happen to be born in say, London. in a time that the infrastructure was all there, but where did this infrastructure came from? Well, that is the hundreds of years of exploitation of colonialism, right? Why some of these developed countries are so rich? They have the resource to build this infrastructure and all this pollution they created in the past 200 years. Now, there's a lot of other countries are suffering. And if you happen to be born in some part of the world, probably some state in India that's very sensitive to all this climate change, right? But then this other people may not be willing to help if they have this just world hypothesis, which is wrong, right? We never really live in a just world, but there's a very strong incentive, self-servingly, to believe people get what they deserve. Particularly if you're in developed country, you're in a kind of a good you have the good luck to live in those places in those time, right? Then you kind of attribute that, okay, of course, I deserve it because I did the right thing. Sorry, you didn't.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there are 2 points that you provided as a part of the solution. One is the lack of ownership. If somebody feels they're a part of the problem, they would then think of a solution to fix that. Two is a sense of community building that is crucial for solution providing of this scale, right? Again, I mean, going back to the same question again. I mean, when you talk about the lack of action or inaction, if we can term it as. Those born with a silver spoon or those born with privileges often, uh, I mean, I mean, generalizing again might be a wrong thing to do, but because we do find examples of people born with privileges do much more towards climate action as compared to those that are not having so much of privilege or I mean, that much of exposure. But again, let me come back to the question, which is based on your theory. So you spent years studying why organizations systematically fail to engage with diversity, right? Even when it's economically rational to hire diverse talent. You have developed this CSRL framework to explain these organizational barriers. Now, let me ask you this. What fundamental parallels do you see between firms failing to engage diversity and societies failing to embrace sustainability? That's one. The second question is, are we talking about the same psychological and the structural barriers that just applied to a different domain?
Yeah. I can probably give you the example about why firms or organizations fail to engage diversity. I can definitely see there's a connection to sustainability, but you can probably tell me a more relevant example whether that applies to. So yeah, this CSRL framework is like a funnel, right? So who can kind of engage this opportunity in a more effective way? Well, there's a lot of barrier, behavioral barrier or social barrier you need to overcome. So think about diversity. If you want to solve a difficult problem, challenging question like sustainability, the best hope is to assemble a cognitively diverse team. They have different expertise, different experience, different knowledge. And we're not talking about demographic diversity, right? Because that can be a bias because people may look very different from different culture, different gender, whatever. But if they all think the same cognitively, you're not going to have the cognitive diversity. And
Yeah.
cognitive diversity is directly contributing to the quality or the creativity of the solution you can come up with. So the non-overlapping cognitive diversity is the key here. But the problem is that there's a lot of behavioral barrier, like I said. So cognizing a limit, the first one is about, well, a lot of time, if you look at firms, particularly in some of the Western countries, they can mistake demographic diversity for cognitive diversity. So very often they have the board member, if they're more female being recruited or more people from different races being recruited, they believe performance will increase. Well, not necessarily. It really depends on their cognitive diversity, right? So you need to recognize, okay, so probably this is a mistake or insufficient correlation. So you need to overcome that. Okay, so we need to find a way to measure people's cognitive diversity. But it comes to the second limit, the searching limit. How do you find the right person that can kind of help you solve the puzzle? If you think about solving this problem is like solving a very difficult puzzle, and very often this the last piece of the puzzle usually come from the underdog. those very different from the elites, right? So they probably have some hidden knowledge, hidden experience that none of the elites have. But hiring them can be very risky. So while they don't look typical compared to your current colleagues, right? So let me give you a concrete example. So I work with a law firm in the magic circle in London, it's a very high status firm. And one of the students took my class, and I, of course, a lecture on this quality diversity and the importance for innovation and all this. And after the class, she came to me, "Oh, right, professor, you need to come to my company because this is exactly the problem we're dealing with." So it turns out the diversity they talk about is that at least 70% of the partners and many entry-level lawyers came from two universities in the UK.
There's thing similar.
Exactly. Not surprising in the UK context, Oxford and Cambridge, right? They're all very good, but now you can think about the filter process. How they get into Oxford and Cambridge are also very similar. They
Hmm.
probably went to private school, they play the same sports. They went to the same high school and A level, and then entering this two university, and still sharing a lot of network information, right? Sources. So they actually may look very different in terms of gender, race, whatsoever, but the way they make decisions are very similar. So on the one hand, the information they have is all coming from the same network, and on the other hand, the way they're trained kind of make them to think similarly, right? So to law firm for many years, this is an advantage because they're all very good. I mean, graduating from Oxford and Cambridge, almost like guaranteed you're good enough. It's
Yeah,
not
you're the
not be
best.
the bad, but good enough, right? And those are the elites in many society. You have the filter process from where I came from, Taiwan, and possibly India, some of this top school, right? But then they recognize that with the change of technology and the intense competition, that technology like AI, all this machine learning we're talking about almost 2013, 14, the AI is not there yet. It's really just about text prediction and the machine learning. And then the firm feel they need to do something different, but they realize the current employee, the partner, they have no clue about what these are because they're totally disconnected to the community or to the network. They have some knowledge about this latest technology, right? So they kind of ask me to get some diagnosis and what is the solution. So it turns out the solution is very simple. Solution is this CV blind policy. Now is pretty famous, popular, right? So because it turns out it's not about discrimination, why this company continue hiring Oxbridge graduate, it's not about they discriminate people not graduating from there. It's more like subconscious decision making. When they screen CV, if they saw someone graduating from this two university, it's so salient, they cannot unsing it.
Yeah.
So the solution with it is part of this nudge idea, right? You change the decision structure or decision kind of context to allow better decision because we knew that this Oxbridge signal is too salient. Then CV blind application in this case that just remove the information.
Hmm.
And then, of course, the subconscious cue is gone, so the recruiter need to evaluate the CV using other information. So it
Right.
turns out it's very effective. Many non-Oxbridge graduates were shortlisted, and
Mhm.
that is important also because before it's like non-Oxbridge graduate almost impossible to be shortlisted, and of course, eventually none of them got hired, right? But now after they're being shortlisted, the probability of them being hired actually is equal to the Oxbridge graduate. So the problem is not really about discrimination, right? Because if they've been shortlisted, the subsequent recruiting process is pretty okay. It's
Right.
pretty transparent and fair. There's not much bias over there. So that's how we help them solve the problem. But this case has a twist because I revisited them in like 5 years later, and I discovered many of these non-Oxbridge hire they left prematurely, so they did not wait for the next career kind of milestone for the evaluation about their prospect for becoming a junior partner whatsoever. So of course, my initial guess is that okay, so this is R in the CSRL framework, right? Reconfiguring the whether the culture is too Oxbridge, the club culture, so they cannot really kind of fit in this non-Oxbridge graduate. But it turns out my intuition was wrong. I interview
Mhm.
some of them and say, no, actually, they really try to incorporate because there's the top-down kind of a change. It really effectively changed the view of many of the partners. They believe that to survive, this company need to change, need to
Right.
incorporate all these different type of employees. So that was fine. It turns out the pushback was from the L, the last filter, the legitimizing limit. So here is about the external stakeholder, in this case, the client. So
Hmm.
the client actually, what they did is that, okay, they can recognize all the lawyers you sent are different. How do they know they're different? Because the accent. So some of these lawyer can, they don't have this typical Oxbridge accent, and then they suspect, they check the background, then complain to the company. So why are you sending this lawyers to me? Am I not am I the second graded clients to you?
Not that important.
Yes, exactly. So if the buyers came from your, well, clients who pay for your service, that is a very difficult barrier to overcome. So
Mhm.
almost like they almost capture this diversity or performance bonus by recruiting a completely diverse team, but they kind of being stuck at the last stage because of this legitimizing or
Legitimacy.
external stakeholder that's too strong. So I can probably see some parallel to sustainability or climate change initiative, right? Yeah, you need to recognize this is important, but then you also need to search for the suitable solution because a lot of solution is context dependent or organization dependent. You
Right.
need to understand that it's not just like a copy a very good solution elsewhere. You can make it work locally. You need to try and error and find a suitable one. That is a searching process, right? But still, the internal process sometimes is very difficult because you need to have the buy-in of many of the colleagues. But we already talked about before, oh, smart people, they may have a myopia more, right? So they may focus on the immediate
Yeah, the
advantage,
short-sightedness.
advantage or the outcome a lot. So they may not buy in. They say, okay, though this is a good alternative, but what is the cost we need to pay today? And
Mhm.
if that's too costly, they may just ignore that. But finally, is that, well, that is probably in the US context, it's very clear. Some research talking about that, right? Because if you signal you're engaging in some of the climate change or sustainability initiative, because the political environment in the US is now so polarized, so
Mhm.
client or the customer actually they will try to avoid those company doing things that is so different from their political belief because political belief now is correlated with some of the sustainability initiative choices by the company. So if a company they really want to maximize the profit, then they all stay silent or they try to avoid doing some of the things, even they knew that's very effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
They may send a wrong signal to their buyer. They may choose not to do it. So that's very unfortunate. I can see the link, but you can probably link to more specific initiative in your own context.
No, I mean, I do get the example and as well as the parallels that you just drew when it comes to sustain. But I want to question a little deeper into the very foundation of the very structure or the framework that you just provided, right? Which is the necessity for cognitive diversity. Is it so much important for us to have an organization or an entity where there is cognitive diverseness as compared to like-mindedness? Is it required? Because I mean, counterintuitively, I would be thinking that if there are people who are like-minded, decision making would be faster and quicker. But from what you're telling me right now, the diversity would lead to better decision making. Can you throw some more light on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Sustainability is a very good example because to effectively address some of the grand challenges like sustainability, you need very different expertise, right? You need to have a physicist and you need to have a lot of different natural scientists to measure exactly what's going on, the mechanism, right? But in terms of developing policy and also considering all these coordination challenges like a public goods tragedy of the commons, they need a social scientist and you need even well and also policy maker politician to be on board, right?
Mhm.
So basically it means that no expert had the cognitive capacity to understand all this necessary knowledge. So the best hope is to assemble a team that each of them kind of being the specialist in their own area, right? So putting them together, they're more likely to come up with a good enough solution that cover all this diverse domain of knowledge and expertise, right? So that's almost a necessary condition for coming out with this good solution for a grand challenge. The more complicated your problem is, the more need to assemble this cognitively diverse team or the team that have non-overlapping cognitive diversity. But you're right. In terms of implementation, yeah, have the similar-minded people communicating easier, and they can also unite and coordinate easier. That is definitely necessary. So this kind of depending on the phase of your decision making, right? If you're trying to come up with a solution,
Mhm.
I think the cognitive diversity is super important. But
Right.
when you try to implement that solution, then you need to think about the dynamic within a team. So you probably need to have this a team that probably less diverse than the first phase, so that they can communicate the solution, coordinate all this action in a more effective way. So you're absolutely right. So many of this advice or many of this solution is all context dependent, culture dependent, time dependent, or task dependent. So if the task is to come up with the creative solution for a difficult problem, then cognitive diversity is the key. But now, given you have found a good solution, you want to maximize the execution efficiency, then probably cognitive diversity should be lower because the task is now different.
Right. I mean, it's interesting when you look at the very problem from a different angle, just like yours. I mean, I'll dig a little deeper once again here. I mean, coming back to the Indian context, because it is a paradox here. I mean, we are a nation where 71% of the people believe climate change is real and the climate action needs to be urgent. But even after having that bigger percentage, less than 18% have meaningfully changed their behavior. So, what behavioral patterns do you see that explains this gap? One, and is this uniquely Indian, or do you see this as a pattern that is universal?
Yeah, I think this when you share this statistic, I was pleasantly surprised. I think 71%, that is definitely higher than other statistic I saw about because there's a lot of society, you have a lot of skeptics, right? They're not even believe, okay, depending on how you define awareness, right? But I think typical statistic is that you're polarized, probably almost half believe it's happening, the other half don't believe anything related to that. So yeah. So I think another very generic framework is about the awareness, motivation, and capability. To
Mhm.
engage in any change, individual change to organization change to societal changes, you need to think about the three necessary components, right? The first of all, you need to be aware there's an important issue deserve your attention. So 71%, let me take the face value of it, that is very promising. That
Yeah.
you're already kind of better than many other societies, right? Because many other societies, the problem there is that people have very strong confirmation bias. So there's a very classic experiment about climate change. So people or experimental subject were invited to the room to read some evidence. The same evidence distributed to everyone,
Mhm.
so if people are rational, when they leave the room, their view should be more moderate, right? In the sense that if you do believe that climate change is happening, but some
Yeah.
of the evidence may suggest, okay, so there may be an exaggeration whatsoever, so you'll become more moderate. But on the other hand, if you're a skeptic and some of the evidence that is indeed happening, then you should be more moderate as well, that you'll be less skeptical than before. But what happened after they read the evidence is the opposite to the prediction. People's view become more extreme. This is a confirmation bias in the sense that if you have a prior belief, then you filter out all this evidence that's contradictory to what you believe, and you put a lot of weight in those who already confirming your prior belief. So people come into the room and leave the room with their prior belief even strengthened. So this is where awareness the other way to define it is whether you believe that climate change is happening, right? That's why in many society you have this like 40% believing that, 40% that don't believe that, and 20% cannot decide, right? That's a very typical kind of statistics. So 71% that is definitely promising. But then it's about the motivation, right? So we talk about this myopia, that's definitely one of the barrier, right? So knowing that is not sufficient. Motivation means that, okay, so do you have the cognitive capacity to do that? Unfortunately, if you're unfortunately in a poverty situation, there's some behavior economists research talk about attention is a very scarce resource. So if your life is very challenging, you need to deal with all this business and the all this everyday challenge, you don't have capacity to think about this long-term issue, including sustainability. Even you knew it, you're not motivated to do anything or whatever. So that is one thing. And the other is that capability. So even you know it and are motivated to do that, but capability for an issue like sustainability is that the coordination, right? Doing that individually is not enough. It's almost like will have no impact on whatsoever. Like if you recycle all the things or you kind of turn the temperature of your air conditioning kind of higher from, I mean, I don't know,
24?
24, 26, something like that. That helps a little bit, right? But if you're only you doing it, it's almost like inconsequential at all to this grand challenge. You need to have sufficient number of people doing that. But that coordination without the right incentive scheme at the policy level, it won't happen. So it's the awareness, motivation, capability. I think awareness-wise, you're definitely on the very promising start. But I can imagine in your context, the other two, just like many other societies, usually the main barrier are the motivation and the capability.
Yeah, the one good thing that has happened in India is, I mean, when it comes to awareness, I mean, the statistics that I've just provided you with, it might be off, but one good thing that has happened is the penetration of internet. Every Indian has access to cell phone, and the internet is dirt cheap, so everybody knows what is
Yeah.
climate change today, and also given the context of the origins. I mean, India has a majority which are nature worshippers, so what we talk today as sustainability was something that our grandparents did by nature, because they found to be it to be necessary to be in sync with nature. But sometime in between during colonialism, perhaps it has that link has been broken, where there is slight westernization that has happened over a period of time. I mean, it is not to start with a blame game that it has happened because of them, this or XYZ. But awareness exists, as you clearly pointed out, even though they might not understand in the same terms as you just spoke. Two, the capability also exists, because majority of the population today has access to internet, one, and most of them are having a bachelor's degree, and we are one of the youngest population today globally present, which means capability also exists, technology also exists. What is lacking is the motivation, and that is where I would want you to throw your thoughts, because uh, from the government end the policies are being made, like banning of single-use plastics have been told, the segregation of waste, and every day there will be a municipality garbage truck that would come making announcement sorry, making an announcement that you segregate your wet waste separately, the dry waste separately, and all of that. With all this education being shared, it being spoken out loud through multiple methods, uh, the execution or the implementation of the solutions is, I mean, as compared to when it started to how it is now, a lot has changed, because India ran something called as the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which is Clean India initiative, and it was promoted, marketed by the governmental agencies to bring people together so that the ownership was transferred to the citizens of the country, and that was a good change, because a lot of citizens did take it up. But even having said that, today we still have this problem that the same folks, when they go to a Western country, somewhere in Europe, they suddenly magically seem to have all the civic sense. But when it comes to their own country, when they come back to the same own country, their own country, the civic sense seems to be lost. Right. So where is the problem? I mean, how can we address this problem? Because awareness exists, capability exists. There are clear policy aspects that are in place. So my question is, what do we do to bring about more ownership, better motivation among the citizens to take up when it comes to aspects like this? That is question number one. Are there any policy tweaks that you could recommend? Like, maybe make the policies much more stricter, imposing heavier fines. Is that the way forward? The carrot and the stick. So I'm asking you, what is a better incentive to provide to the citizens so that they take better conscious action?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very interesting challenge you're having there, right? So awareness and capability seems to be there, but motivation is may not be present. Yeah, I think that as a behavioral scientist, I would probably say, yeah, we probably have a lot of tools. So we have a toolbox about intervention, right? But whether some of this tool will work in a specific context, we need to test, just like a scientist, right? I mean, we need to develop hypotheses, experiment, and let the evidence speak which
Hmm.
one works. So this direct kind of implementation or copying of other successful practices almost never works. But I think some of the approaches that can be promising to consider first or prioritize. One of them is that the old economist favorite, right? Stick and carrot. If you do more, you got some encouragement or tax relief, and if you don't do it, you can get fined. But I think the behavioral science suggests that, okay, so if that works, continue doing it. But behaviorally, we can also introduce something to encourage that even more. So one of them is definitely norm. Norm is related to the social influence, right? So if you're in a community like you're the minority that hasn't done that, then you
Hmm.
feel more pressure of conforming to the majority, right? But how do you kind of encourage that tipping point to be achieved? There's a lot of technique you can consider. Sometimes it's about this small wins. So you do something very trivial initially,
Hmm.
but then when you make a change, you write this narrative, you diffuse this story to everyone and saying that, okay, so this is so positive, this is so useful. And once more people kind of internalize and memorize this small wins, then that can cascade and scale a lot. So a lot of a policymaker or ambition is like too overconfident in about behavioral changes. So because they may say, well, you share one of this policy, right? 2047, is that right?
Yeah, the 2047 Vikasat Bharat. The
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that definitely can be very useful in terms of you have the ambition, because sometimes ambition can trigger all this coordinated action. People share the vision, right? But sometimes the motivation aspect of behavioral change, you need this kind of local, small wins, the stories about effective change to diffuse so that more people are influenced by that, and then the majority view kind of a shift,
Mhm.
then the motivated to do that thing at the same time. So that's the kind of top down and bottom up are definitely complementary. But I'm seeing a lot of country they focus a lot on the top down, which is useful, of course, but they forget about the importance about this motivational effect and the power of a small win. So I think that can be considered in your context also.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to small wins, there are no special incentives as such that the municipality or the government provides the citizens with for taking positive actions when it comes to cleanliness, maintaining cleanliness, and all of that. Because but social media has played a vital role. Politicians coming up with the broomstick, cleaning the place and all that. Them installing additional uh, toilets or dustbins so that the waste is not just thrown on the roads. It's to be thrown in the specific areas where there are bins. But even after all of that, I think the small wins is, of course, there is a shout out given by somebody. Somebody takes a selfie with the very prominent social media influencer doing the
Oh
same
yeah.
exercise. So those are, I mean, I could account them as maybe small wins. Uh, but here is
Yeah,
a sorry.
just one point. This small win need to be communicated and diffused using good storytelling, right? It's not
Right.
about showing statistic. You have more toilets and like less kind of contagion or whatever disease, right? That doesn't work with people.
Mm.
People are like reacted to stories. So if you change that to a very specific, like a little girl that doesn't have any toilets, or the route for doing that is that they're very unsafe, all this, but suddenly you have a toilet and a lot of thing has improved from for her life. that is a story will move people, and people will more likely to engage in doing more of that. That is a small win that can diffuse through story, not through the code, numbers, or statistics.
Right, right. I think that's a very strong solution or a great solution to consider storytelling. And I honestly believe the establishment has done a fantastic job with that as well, the storytelling part as well.
Okay.
Because they started the canvassing with this very theme of Swachh Bharat. Swachh Bharat stands for Clean India, right? So which involved building toilets, keeping the surroundings clean, and all of that, right? I'll give a classical example once again, right? If there were a dustbin right in front of you, there are folks who are so lazy they would not walk up and put the garbage into the dustbin. They would just throw it nearby. But the moment there is a camera set up, right, in that place, they're much more conscious about where it is to be dropped, right? So when under vigilance, uh, folks take better decision in this case. Why is it so? Is it because that as human beings we want to be watched? Is that something that plays a role in here?
I would say human nature, we probably don't want to be watched or monitored all the time. That sounds an interesting story, but I think the behavior change is more in line with the economist traditional approach, right? Because you're potentially to be penalized, so being monitored, you can have legal consequence or being fined, right? Then people do less of that. I think the behavior change or nudge, this idea, we also had some exchange, right? I think it's the principle or the spirit is design the choice architecture to go with the grain of human nature
Mhm.
instead of against it. So I think a penalty and stick and the carrot can be very useful, but sometimes the behavioral change cannot last. What if that camera is not working? What's your prediction? I mean, in many contexts, that if people knew that camera is not working, their behavior just changed back, right? But if you kind of design the choice architecture in a way that go with the human nature, then the impact can be much more lasting. So I think that's one difference that we learned from a lot of research. Yeah, and that is very important, right? If you go with the human nature, it's not just lasting, but also the cost may be much lower than installing a camera everywhere, right?
I mean, installing a camera everywhere will definitely not be a solution. I mean, just on a funny side,
Yeah.
there are situations where even if the camera is not working, if it's just a dummy camera,
Yeah.
people still behave well if they just see a red light or a red dot going up, right?
Yeah.
So that's the strange part that I sometimes find very fascinating, that how can just a red light make you take a better decision? I mean, just under the impression that I'm being watched,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, just adding a spiritual angle to it. And back in the day, people were God fearing, meaning they always felt somebody is watching them, do things. And then in today's date and time, the concept of all of that, the heavens and hell is slowly diluting, right? And unless there is a real camera on top of their head watching them, they feel they're in complete control of their choices that they make, and that's where this entire conversation is headed. Anyway, let's get back to the topic once again. So one key point that you made is about the policymakers, how they structure the policy, and what kind of nudging storytelling that they add into this, right? But again, there is the paradox, or rather the counterintuitiveness of smart people making wrong decisions. So let's dig into the core paradox of this episode. So why do intelligent, educated, aware systematically fail to take action on sustainability? And from your research on behavioral biases and decision making, walk us through the psychological mechanism that prevent action when even when someone intellectually understands the problem.
Yeah, that's definitely a very hard question, right? So yeah, and very puzzling as well. I think we already covered several related aspects, right? So I think one we haven't talked about is the information access, but the CV blind policy actually related to that is that a lot of smart people, if you think about the elites in a society, usually they're living in a bubble, so they don't have access or exposure to many of these challenges experienced by others. And they may be in a neighborhood or an area that's more resilient or less impacted by many of the sustainability issue or grand challenges, then they underestimate the importance of that. That is the awareness, right? That's a more nuanced version of the awareness. They probably knew something bad is happening, but they did not feel the urgency and why they should prioritize that. And that I think that's why smart people can make poor decisions on this important issue, right? But the other is that smart people, they can be more rational in the economist sense. They actually have a stronger myopia
Mhm.
compared to others. They really prioritize the short-term benefit and underestimate the long-term kind of losses or the disruptive consequence, right? Particularly with uncertainty, then you kind of discount the future bad scenario even more. That doesn't help. So I think this too can explain, in my view, a lot of the variance, a lot of this behavior, why smart people do dumb thing already. And in very general, I think the theoretical label is about overconfidence. So smart people usually are also more confident than they should. Then of course that is the one major indicator of bad decision making, right? If you don't have the perfect knowledge or perfect awareness of a challenge, but you kind of not so confident, then you're actually more open-minded. You're more likely to collect information and search for information to increase your knowledge, right? But if you're overconfident, you already feel like you knew everything. You know the problem, you knew the solution. You're not going to explore, and that usually is a very predictable way leading to poor decision making.
Yeah. So two pointers stood out for me in the answer that you just provided me with. One is you do have the awareness, but you might not have had the first-hand experience of the problem itself that could lead to bad decision making when it comes to smart people. Two is a sense of overconfidence that could lead to a bad decision making. Again, let me take it from the context of an organization here, Shengwei. When you work with organizations on behavioral change, what's the single biggest barrier that you encounter? Is it that people don't understand the problem, or is it something else?
Well, as a professor, actually, I have the privilege of, well, unlike my previous career, like a consultant, right, to choose the client. So I think my samples are biased. So if not even have the awareness or the motivation, like the legal firm, right, I won't even engage them. I just say, okay, so we can have a meeting over coffee. But once I learn they're really not ready to make any changes, then I just say, okay, yeah, we can get in touch again in 6 months. Yeah, so that is a bias sample. So usually the organization I work with, they already overcome a lot of initial barriers, right? They okay, so they understand this is an important issue and they motivated to make some changes. Then the capability, the coordination, there's a lot of behavioral science can help, and that's where I go in. So to answer your question, I think overconfidence can still be a very generic label to capture why some of the organizations don't do it, right? The major barrier is that it's not what you don't know, it's what you know for sure that just ends so. That is a very famous quote in behavioral science, right? So that capture if the organization believing they're doing the right thing, then they will not have any motivation to check whether they're right or wrong, right? Because they knew they're right. They assume they're right. And the capability that needed for changing will not be there as well. So I think the a very healthy dose of self-doubt or skepticism is a generic solution to solve that. So always check whether you're overconfident.
Right.
And
And
assuming to
and
be wrong.
what would be your way to work with folks like that who come
Yeah.
across or I mean maybe they wouldn't know they are overconfident.
Yeah.
But how do you work with them?
Yeah, exactly. If I need to work with them, like some of the MBA students, even they can be skeptical about some of the thing. One of the very effective behavioral techniques called pre-mortem.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it's a force you to overcome this overconfident trap. So consider you're doing a project, and you haven't done it, but now just have a meeting with the project manager or the executive with the core team member. Then the executive need announce that this project just failed dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everyone in the team just write in their own paper anonymously, okay, why did that happen? So it's a pre-mortem, right? So it kind of before the project actually go ahead, everyone just counterfactually or imaginally has failed. Then retrospectively figure out what can be the causes that have led to the failure. And then the executive just ask someone to collect all these responses. And then the team will be a group to work on, okay, so each of the cause, what could be the solution?
Right.
Now you can probably see this is a very effective behavioral technique because it overcomes several barrier, right? Because in many organizations, people have this the ego-centric decision making, right? Usually, project is emotionally attached to the executive or the project manager. They just
Right.
have this optimistic prediction. They don't want to think about failure, but this technique kind of forced them to assume it has failed.
Right.
Then kind of prepare them mentally to think about, okay, so how would I prevent that from happening?
Mm-hmm.
And also kind of remove this political tension, right? Because sometimes people don't want to challenge others' brainchild, this project is others' brainchild. You don't want to be in a meeting and say, no, this is going to fail. But the pre-mortem, if it's institutionalized and become a default option for any important project in your organization,
Mm-hmm.
that is a very effective way to remove several of these behavioral hurdles. So yeah, I recommend every organization before making any important decision or project to run this pre-mortem.
Very, very innovative way of handling stuff. I think it would definitely. I mean, I can see it working, because given that when you imagine even before the project begins that it is going to fail, it would allow for better conversations, better communication, different point of views. Maybe people would also be prepared just in case if things were to go down south, and that would also break the overconfidence part of individuals, which would open up themselves to better decision making as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The beauty is that, well, this is not a technical solution, right? Because all this knowledge, all these responses, basically based on the existing knowledge of the team. So
Right.
this is a behavioral solution. Because the quality diversity, I think that is related to that. You can assemble a team with
Right.
very high non-overlapping quality diversity, but if they don't have the psychological safety to express what they privately believe, then as if you only have one individual, you don't have a team because everyone just listen to the most senior
Right.
or the manager, right? Then you don't have any effective realized diversity in the team. So that is also very prevalent in many organizations. If you have the culture that kind of just punish all this failure, then people will feel very intimidated and not to express their view and worry that if you try this, experiment that, and it leads to failure, then you got penalized, and no one want to propose any novel solution anymore.
Got it. Got it. Got it. I mean, since you brought the part of the culture up here, my question is, do you think the cultural factors in India, like the family structures, social hierarchies, or social traditions, do they amplify or mitigate the psychological barriers to sustainability? Do you feel that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Some of my research, current research about the organization structure and how that improves decision making or when they kind of make decision making poorer, right? I think in general, it's every type of structure or culture has a pros and cons because the culture become a part of the culture in a country, usually for good reason, particularly evolutionarily. Probably in that environment, that culture help human in that society or in that context to thrive. But the mismatch idea is important here. So probably now the environment has evolved in a way that the culture that was beneficial before is no longer useful for the new challenges people have. So I think that is a general framework to think about that, right? But more specifically about this very hierarchical culture, hierarchical structure versus say the flatter decision-making structure. It has exactly this pros and cons in the two phase of decision making. So first of all, you can think about, okay, so if you want to make a important decision making, you want to get information, right? And the flat organization or the more distributed structure in terms of network structure usually is useful for collecting diverse information because any information usually can diffuse very fast and efficiently in a flatter organization compared to a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Hierarchy, you have a lot of gatekeeper, right? So everyone, anyone in the hierarchy level, just kind of filter out information. Then no one kind of above that level will hear it, right? That's
Yeah.
why the leader in the organization usually they know the less because a lot of relevant information may be filtered out due to the conflict of interest or whatever. However, I think you hinted before also in terms of implementation at the second phase, flat organization can struggle with this coordination and implementation efficiency a lot. However, hierarchy structure, wow, that was with human being for thousands of years for good reason because the execution, if you think about millions years ago, thousands years ago, a group of hunters want to hunt a large prey. Execution is important. You better have a leader asking everyone to do their specific task. If you have a flat, everyone just coordinate, improvise, probably they will all be wiped out. So so the pros and cons here is that if you think about information diffusion, how to collect the most important relevant information for good decision making, flatter organization can help.
Mm-hmm.
When you're thinking about implementation, you probably need to assign or assemble a task force. Probably need to have less flat, if not hierarchical structure to maximize efficiency. But also, I mentioned it's a leader, right? If your organization currently is a very hierarchical structure orientated,
Mm-hmm.
then you assume the leader do not always have best access to all the information he or she needs. So the
Mm-hmm.
leader need to be again reflective and being self-critical. Always try to break this hierarchical structure. Go to the factory, go to the front line, talk to the customer to get the fresh information that may have been filtered out due to the structure. So that is probably related to
So it
the
is, it is more of a trade-off or rather a balancing act, if I were to read between the lines, because when it comes to certain tasks, a flat structure is better. When it comes to decision making, perhaps a hierarchical structure is a lot better because there is one person taking the call. Would that be
Yeah,
fair?
exactly. You can kind of think about this in two ways, right? One is the temporal difference. So you can have like information or coming out with solution phase, information collection phase to be flat. And then in the second phase, probably 3 months later, you want to implement the chosen alternative. Then you assemble the text for in a different way. Or you can have this balanced view, right? So you probably can develop a structure for your organization that, well, it's not too flat and not too hierarchical. It
Yeah.
really depends on the organization and the context, right? Some of the organization, you can't really change your structure every day, but some of them, like particularly IT, I think that type of kind of assembling the force depending on the task, that is a very usual, right? If you're in software in IT, that you don't have a lot of factory setup, then
Yeah.
people can be very fluid in how they engage in different structure. But if you're in like a production line, a factory, then the structure need to be more stable, right? Then you probably have to think about balancing this structure in an optimal way.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the reason why I asked this question about culture is there are certain organizations that we also engage with, right? What we see as one of the barrier is especially with the management there, because the ones who are running the show are in their maybe mid 40s, 50s, 60s, and then there is one more set of people uh, who are just starting out. I mean, I wouldn't like to put any name or a tag on that. Like the Gen Zs or the millennials who are there just starting out their career or maybe in somewhere as mid managers and things like that. When we talk about this concept of sustainability or the need for climate action, there is much more eagerness to take up climate action when it comes to the younger folks. But when it is about talking to the senior management who call the shots, it is much more difficult, right? Being because when they have been growing up, perhaps they have not felt or experienced the impacts of climate change as much as this generation or the generation after us has done. So what would your suggestion be, or rather recommendation be, about how to deal with folks who are in their maybe mid 40s, 50s, who are calling the shots? How do we engage and sort of connect with them to take up action on sustainability?
Yeah, that's an important question. Again, I don't have a good solution. I can be pretty cynical about that. Some economists, actually behavior economists, they did this interesting study about when change can happen.
Hmm.
Well, in academia, actually, you have a theory, right? But it kind of proved to be insufficient or sometimes it's wrong. But
Right.
then what they found is that they still get more citation. A lot of people doing that kind of failing research program. Why? Because some of the leader or the thought leader that created that theory still are they are around, and all this student become the defender of that the falling or failing theory, right? So the conclusion or the title of that paper is really engaging. Theory advance one funeral at a time.
Yeah, one funeral. Okay.
Yeah, it
But
cannot be wait until this old guard or the founder kind of pass away, and then all this social barrier kind of collapse, right?
hmm,
So that is of course very gloomy or kind of a sad prediction, right? So when can we
too
uh,
much time to wait for,
yeah,
eh?
exactly. I mean, if they're in their 50s and they're retiring in 65, okay, 15 years. Can we wait for that regarding sustainability? I would say that's probably too late, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, particularly given this myopia challenges, yeah, we cannot be too optimistic about how this last generation or the leader who currently at the leadership role really embrace all this urgency and make necessary changes. But yeah, we need to have some hope. So I think I don't have a solution yet, but I think some of these small wins, the social dynamic to have a external stakeholder as a customer or client to put pressure on this organization. I think yeah, things are changing in the right direction, but
Right.
again, too slow for what we're dealing with here. But there's
The,
hope again.
the reason I asked that question is to get a discussion around nudging, because nudging as a concept when it comes to behavioral sciences is significantly important, right? Because it is seen that uh, nudging subtly works better than going out loud marketing and talking about sustainability and telling people what is the right thing to do. That doesn't seem to work as much. So. Uh, Shagvi, what is your take on nudging? Maybe first to our listeners, you could maybe give a brief introduction to what nudging means, and what is the right way to nudge a population? Is or if there is a right way to nudge a population?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then the idea about nudge exactly is kind of emerged from this behavior economics revolution, right? So what if some of the behavioral assumptions are wrong in the classic model, and then people realize, okay, so the same finding actually can tell normative implication, right? Because we can, when people behave in a predictably irrational way, and actually this predictable irrational way can be turned on their head and become useful intervention to direct for better behavior. And like I said before, it's kind of go with the grain of human nature. It's not like the traditional approach. If you have a bias, you educate people, telling people they're wrong, they're stupid. People don't like to be called stupid, right? But
Right.
then going with the grain of human nature is saying that, okay, if you may do things in a predictable way, like if your camera installed and you're less likely to throw trash, it can be considered one of the nudge also, because that is kind of driven by salience, right? Salience meaning that, okay, there's a very novel feature, then you kind of process that information and not taking for granted. And okay, so there's a camera, so potentially there may be some consequence for my behavior now, and I may do less about that. So that can be considered one version of the nudge. But I should probably also say that nudge is not like the silver bullet. It's not going to solve all these problems.
Yeah.
It usually work complementary to other approaches. Like smoking, for example, that was a problem again, not sustainability, but again, very health problem, right? For many society linked to lung cancer, all this. And why the smoking number of people in the UK drop continuously? Well, of course, making it more expensive, like a tax
Hmm.
uh, that's effective, and also like showing all this terrible picture in the each of the pack, right? So reminding people if you continue doing this, you may have the consequence of that. That can be considered behavior intervention. But the other very classical behavior intervention UK government did is that, okay, so people used to smoke a lot inside the pub
Hmm.
because they have beer, have smoke, and they just continue doing that. Then they changed the policy saying that, okay, so no smoking indoor. So people need to go out and smoke. And usually it can be too hot, too crowded, or too cold in the winter. Then the number of smokers decrease dramatically. That is kind of a nudge because you design the policy so that people feel smoking becomes so inconvenient. So when you make something inconvenient, actually people do less about that. That is very predictable, and
Right.
then you achieve your goal, right? So that is a classic example about when you have this behavioral idea. Sometimes this change can be induced in a very cost-effective way. Having that policy, you don't actually need to redesign the infrastructure, right? But then the effective cost for saving the NHS, the health system in the UK, that is a contribution very
Yeah.
substantial.
Mr. Chengwei, thank you so much for your time. It was absolute privilege listening to you giving those nuggets of information around behavioral science, nudging, and how we can influence the population when it comes to sustainability. It was an absolute pleasure. And for those of you who are listening in and want to reach out to Chengwei, Dr. Chengwei, we will drop the link to his LinkedIn profile in the description. You could definitely get in touch. Chengwei, any parting words?
The pleasure is all mine. Enjoy our conversation very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great, great.